Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about Professor P's 3 science challenges. Well, at least the first one, anyway. As you remember, I was not in an ideal situation, truth be told, and there were some quite unexpected twists already, that's for sure. To recap, I was on my way to confront Professor P, and I was also trying to figure out how to defeat him. I mean, if I did, he said he would disclose the whereabouts of Professor Sampson, my old mentor. Now, as I've said before, when I first learned of Professor Sampson's sudden and mysterious disappearance, I did try to find him, but I had no luck and eventually had to give up on the search. But again, I never lost hope. I wasn't the only one hoping I would find Professor Sampson either. Professor Cook from the Getty was romantically involved with him a while back and also searched for him when he disappeared. She also hoped I could find him, and I assured her I would do my best. Anyway, I was able to locate Professor P's not-so-hidden volcanic lair, and after a little trial and error, I found a way in. You see, after the beach and the underwater submarine entrance didn't work out due to mines and possibly routine maintenance, I launched my aeropod and went up and over and then into the volcano, where I found a landing platform and made my way deeper into the said pretend volcano. I found Professor P sitting on a throne he had made for himself, but nothing could have prepared me for who walked in and sat next to him. Yes, my ex-wife, Julia, was there with him, and she then regaled me with the tale of how they met and eventually found a connection through the study of neuromorphic engineering. Now, I was still skeptical as this was all a bit much, but eventually, after the initial shock wore off, Professor P's minions showed me to my room, and while I was exhausted, I didn't see myself going to sleep right away. There was still a lot to think upon, as you can imagine. But before I tell you about the start of the 3 science challenges, I want to tell you about a few things, especially for our new listeners. There are 2 types of shows in the podcast high-speed show feed. There are the regular episodes, such as what you're listening to right now, and Professor Atwood's Sleepscapes to give you more adventures per month. These sleepscapes are pulled directly from my adventures with all the music and sounds we collect on our journeys. We then remix and remaster them and make them longer so you can create your own adventure in your mind as you settle in and drift off to sleep. And as always, don't forget to rate and review the show and maybe post about the show, as that's how other adventurers find us. And if you want more info, some merchandise options like t-shirts and cuddly blankets, and donation and ad-free Patreon subscription options, you can always go to whitecatentertainment.com. Any and all support helps, and we thank you for it. All right then, let's get back to the story. The minion had just brought me to my room to rest and take stock of my situation before the science trial started tomorrow. I was a bit surprised, because the room was actually quite nice. It was spacious and airy with lots of light, and I had a nice view of the jungle and the sunset from my window. I mean, the window was barred, of course, but that was to be expected in the guest room of the fake volcanic lair of the Infinite Science Cabal. I took a deep breath and thought about what awaited me. I wasn't sure how much my ex-wife Julia would be able to temper the science challenges towards fairness, as Professor P would have no such moral compunction towards making them, well, not so fair. I pondered this, and of course I did have a few tricks up my sleeve as well, but until I knew what the challenges were, I would be in the dark. I would have to do a lot of sciencing on the fly. Well, my specialty, if I do say so myself, even though that sounds a bit, well, immodest. I was about to turn in for the night, as I knew the next day would be quite busy, when there was a knock at my door. Perhaps it was the minion again who forgot to give me some dire warning about escaping. I opened the door and was surprised to see Julia standing there with a tray with dinner on it. It then registered how hungry I was, as I hadn't eaten since leaving my submarine in my aeropod. She asked politely if she could come in, and I of course said yes. I still had many questions, but I had a suspicion that this was not the time to ask them. Her face looked happy, but also there was a hint of a troubled look there as well. Subtle, but there, and something only a former spouse could detect. She asked if I was hungry, and I of course said yes, and she began to set up dinner for the two of us. Now, as she set up dinner, which looked delicious with pork chops with an apple glaze, au gratin potatoes, and almond green beans, I noticed she was wearing her hair a little differently. The troubled look returned, albeit briefly, and she nervously adjusted a curl. She asked if I liked it, and I said, of course. Julie continued, saying she thought I may be hungry, and I was. We both dug in, and we kept the conversation light and talked about the kids, Patrick and Ellen, and I told her about the great visit I just had with both of them. Julie smiled and said she missed them and would be seeing them both soon. She knew she had to hurry, as who knows when Patrick would be sent out into space again. A lot of his NASA missions were top secret, as well as his comings and goings. She would tell them about her and Professor P, but wanted to tell me first. Fair enough, I suppose. Soon there was another knock at the door, and this time it was a minion who brought dessert. Julia thanked him and showed me what had been prepared. Peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, one of my favorites. It was delicious, and I told her to please pass on my compliments to the evil fake volcanic lair chef. She said his name was Chet, and she would do just that tomorrow morning after his Pilates class. After dessert, her face darkened a bit, and told me she was worried about the science trials. Professor P would not make it easy for me, she said, but then again, I suspected as much. She said it was more than that. He wouldn't tell her what the trials were, so she couldn't help me prepare. Except for one. She said as a compromise, she was able to pick one of the challenges, and that I would know which one it was. But that was all the help she could offer. I would be on my own, and the rest would be up to me. I told her I understood, and thanked her for the heads up, and for curating one of the challenges. She smiled again, warmly and sincerely, without the hint of discomfort from last time. She wished me good night, and said she would see me in the morning, and then she departed. I was alone again, but my belly was full, and I couldn't go to sleep on a full stomach. The volcano's exterior lights were on, lighting up the jungle and the beach, so the view at night was also quite impressive from my barred window. Despite everything, the night was quite peaceful. Professor P apparently shuts off his volcano at night to save money, but I was also appreciative of the quiet. I took a quick shower and looked around the room for something to read. There was only one book in the room, and it was titled The Genius of Professor P. I decided to play solitaire on my phone instead, until I was sleepy. A full belly, the quiet sounds of the ocean lapping against the beach outside with the occasional jungle sound, was quite relaxing, especially with the fake volcano turned off for the night. I took in the lit-up view outside my barred window for a few more minutes, and I enjoyed the sounds of the island. Afterwards, I climbed into bed, and soon after that, I drifted off to sleep. The next day was bright and sunny, and I barely had time to get dressed when I was summoned by a minion. There was no time to waste, apparently, it was time to start the challenges. I once again walked down a long utilitarian corridor as we made our way back to where Professor P and Julia were waiting. Turns out Professor P couldn't decide on what to call the room, so there was a big, long sign on the door reading, Central Control Development Lab and Throne Room, Geniuses Only. And it took up half the door. And that, of course, was not my only complaint with the sign. Anyway, the minion led me inside. Professor P and Julia were waiting for me, and they both gave me a big smile, although Julia's was more sincere, of course. They offered me a continental breakfast where I could make my own waffles, which I appreciated. They said normally it would be a much larger spread, but their evil volcanic lair chef, Chet, had taken a floating day off unexpectedly. Now, I wondered where people went on their day off on an uncharted island with a fake volcano on it, but I had more important and pressing mysteries to attend to. Professor P said that when I was done with my waffle, we would get started with the first science trial. I said I understood, but I needed to make a request first. And what might that be? Asked Professor P. I said I needed to bring my submarine into the dock, as it was still anchored outside the lair, and I may have need of its mobile lab for the challenges. Professor P was instantly suspicious, but offered to have a minion bring it in for me. It was just a matter of removing the out-of-order sign on the underwater hatchway. Ah, yes, I had a suspicion that was just for show. The submarine dock and the hatch were both fully operational. I mean, you can't have an evil island lair without a functioning submarine dock. I mean, that's like Science Villain 101. I told him I didn't feel comfortable with someone else piloting my submarine, and it would have to be me. He again eyed me suspiciously, but then said very well, and he added the usual no tricks threat at the end. Now, submarine docks are unique and different than your typical ship dock or marina. As you're probably aware, the United States Navy built permanent and temporary submarine bases around the world to maintain its fleet of submarines and serve the needs of the crews. Submarine bases are military bases that offer good fleet anchorage and are designed to refuel and resupply submarines. The peak number of U.S. submarine bases was during World War II, as the submarine was well suited for fighting in the vast Pacific War, often in enemy waters. Of course, many of the United States submarine bases were closed after the war. The need for U.S. submarine bases was created with the completion of the first submarine, USS Holland, which launched in May of 1897. The USS Holland was acquired by the Navy in April in the year 1900. On October 16, 1900, the USS Holland departed for her first port, United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland, for crew training. USS Holland had a crew of 1 officer and 5 enlisted men. Annapolis, being a training center, was not designed as a submarine base, though the USS Holland was stationed there. The USS Pike and the USS Grampus, completed in 1902, were built in San Francisco, California. The Holland Torpedo Boat Company of New York City contracted Union Iron Works to build the 2 Plunger-class submarines. For 3.5 years, the 2 submarines operated out of Mare Island Naval Shipyard in San Francisco Bay for training and testing. Mare Island, being a shipyard, also was not designated as a submarine base. Now, the community of Hamlet in New Suffolk, New York, claims to be the first submarine base in the United States. The USS Holland was based at Hamlet's Holland Torpedo Boat Station, open from 1899 to 1905. 7 submarines built by the Holland Torpedo Boat Company were stationed at Hamlet. Torpedo Boat Station also was not designated by a submarine base by the U.S. Navy, being a private company with Navy personnel stationed there. By January of 1911, the Navy had 20 submarines built: 7 A-class submarines, 3 B-class submarines, 5 C-class submarines, 3 D-class submarines, and 2 E-class submarines. United States F-class submarines were built by the Electric Boat in 1909. The first two, USS F-1 and USS F-2, were built by Union Iron Works. The next two, F-3 and F-4, were built by Moran Brothers in Seattle, Washington in 1912. In 1913, the F-class submarines were stationed at San Pedro, California, and a naval base in San Diego. In 1913, the F-class submarines were stationed at San Pedro, California, and a naval base in San Diego. San Pedro and San Diego also were not designated as submarine bases. In 1915, F-class submarines were stationed at Naval Station Pearl Harbor, also not designated as a submarine base. In 1917, F-class submarines were stationed at San Diego and San Diego's Point Loma. I'm sure by now you're detecting a pattern. The United States Navy designated Naval Submarine Base New London as finally the first actual submarine base. Naval Submarine Base New London was commissioned in 1916 as an actual dedicated submarine base. Due to the Japanese hostilities in China in the South Pacific in 1939, the U.S. Congress approved plans for building submarine bases and seaplane bases at Dutch Harbor, Alaska, Kodiak, Alaska, Midway Atoll, and Wake Island. The ship USS Wyoming, built in 1902, was used as the first submarine tender. The USS Wyoming and other Arkansas-class monitors were converted into submarine tenders as they had low sides, which was good for mooring a submarine on her side. The submarine tender refueled and resupplied the submarines. The submarine tender allowed the submarine to operate at its patrol area longer, operating out of advanced bases in the field. This reduced the need to return to permanent bases farther away. The USS Beaver was the first specially built submarine tender, completed in 1918. Other submarine tenders were built by conversions. The demand for submarine bases during World War II was so great that many specially built submarine tenders were built. Submarine tenders carried fuel for the submarines, food for the crew, and living quarters for the crew to rest while the sub was being serviced. The ship's depot would have all the supplies that the submarine needed to get back on patrol. Submarine bases that had limited or no land facilities used submarine tenders at the advanced submarine bases. The USS Fulton, commissioned on December 7, 1914, was the first of the Fulton-class submarine tenders. Now, of course, things are a bit different. The current U.S. Navy fleet of nuclear submarines never need to be refueled. Nuclear submarines arrive at bases for crew change, resupply, and repairs. Nuclear submarines also have seawater distillation, so bases are not needed for freshwater needs either. Now, my submarine did not run on nuclear power for various reasons, but the WETS propulsion system from the Getty enhanced the dynamic hydrogen-electric hybrid engine with water desalination, so we were using some similar systems. The science villains also did not have nuclear submarines, but for one reason only: cost. They were prohibitively expensive. Anyway, back in the so-called throne room, I politely excused myself and wasted no time returning to my aeropod and lifted off back out of the ersatz volcano at just the right interval as to not get splashed with the edible fake lava. I returned to my submarine, which was right where I left it. Interestingly, there were a few scratches by the hatch, which meant while I was in Professor P's lair, he did indeed send a minion to try to get inside. No chance. I had redundant security protocols for a reason. But I supposed I would have been more surprised if he hadn't tried. Now, I know Julia was telling me how Professor P wanted to change, but I was skeptical still, and there were still some pieces of this puzzle that had yet to reveal themselves. Anyway, I entered the hatch and fired up the O2's engines. It would take a little time to prime everything, so I took that extra time to pack an evil lair bag, and remembered to take a couple of my 6 customized breakable umbrellas, just in case. The engines took less time to prep than I thought, actually, thanks to the Getty's wet system, and soon I had submerged and was underway towards the underwater hatch leading to the submarine dock. As I suspected, there was a minion in scuba gear removing the out-of-order closed for repair sign as it was just a ruse to get me to use my aeropod to come in from the air through the fake volcano. One of the challenges before the actual challenges. I knew I was still being toyed with, but I also knew things would be tempered by Julia. How much was unclear. As I said, there were still some mysteries here that hadn't been resolved, and there were most likely a couple more that hadn't even presented themselves as of yet. I would have to take this whole journey one mystery or challenge at a time. I entered the underwater hatch and proceeded down a sunken corridor to the submarine dock. I surfaced and grabbed my things. Now, I also brought a couple books, as the reading material in my room left a lot to be desired. I forgot to mention there was a second book in my room. In addition to The Genius of Professor P, there was a History of the Infinite Science Cabal, as told by its founder and CEO, the genius Professor P. Most likely, both books would tread the same tired ground. Instead, I grabbed a couple of books from my own stash, including one on neuromorphic engineering, hydrogen engines, and of course a couple of my favorites, including Ray Bradbury's short story collection, The Illustrated Man, which was one I thoroughly enjoyed rereading. There was a minion waiting for me, and I dropped everything off back in my room, after of course I double-checked to make sure my submarine was secure. Professor P had tried once to get inside, and judging by the quality of his remaining minions, I don't think I had anything to worry about. I made my way back to the Central Control Development Lab and Throne Room. I did notice that wherever I went, there was always a minion trailing me a little distance behind, observing me. I was once again standing before Professor P and my ex-wife Julia, who smiled at me once again. Professor P asked if I was all settled in and ready for the first challenge. I said I was. "Very well," he replied. He stood up and with a dramatic flourish announced the first science trial. It would be to build a lava lamp. I took a moment, and then I saw that Julia smiled at me once again. I knew that this is what she was talking about earlier, the help she was able to offer, and I was receiving it right out of the gate. Professor P allowed her to pick one of the science challenges. This was obviously very helpful, but the flip side of the easy first challenge was that I could not expect any help moving forward. And Professor P may even compensate with making the other challenges even more difficult. I would have to wait and see. Anyway, in case there are some younger listeners who don't know what a lava lamp is, or maybe haven't seen Stranger Things yet, a lava lamp is a decorative lamp invented in 1963 by British entrepreneur Edward Craven Walker, the founding of the lighting company Mathmos. It consists of a bolus of a special colored wax mixture inside a glass vessel, the remainder of which contains clear or translucent liquid. The vessel is placed on a base containing an incandescent light bulb, whose heat causes temporary reductions in the wax's density and the liquid's surface tension. As the warmed wax rises through the liquid, it cools, loses its buoyancy, and falls back to the bottom of the vessel in a cycle that is visually suggestive of lava, hence the name. The lamps are designed in a variety of styles and colors. And lava lamps can be associated with hippie and cannabis cultures, of course. And, they still are, anyway. A classic lava lamp contains a standard incandescent or halogen lamp, which heats a tall, often tapered, glass bottle. A formula from a 1968 U.S. patent consisted of water and a transparent, translucent, or opaque mix of mineral oil, paraffin wax, and carbon tetrachloride. The clear water or mineral oil can optionally be colored with translucent dyes. Now, common wax has a density much lower than that of water and would float on top at any temperature. However, carbon tetrachloride is denser than water and also non-flammable and miscible with wax, and is added to the wax to make its density at room temperature slightly higher than that of the water. When heated, the wax mixture becomes less dense than the water because it expands more than water when both are heated. It also becomes fluid, causing blobs of it to ascend to the top of the lamp. There, they cool, increasing their density relative to that of the water, and then descend. A metallic wire coil in the bottle's base breaks the colored blob's surface tension, allowing them to recombine. Since 1970, lava lamps made for the U.S. market have not used carbon tetrachloride, the use of which was banned that year due to toxicity. Haggerty, their current manufacturer, has stated that their current formulation is a trade secret, because I'm sure there's a lot of corporate espionage going on between lava lamp manufacturers. Anyway, the bulb is normally 25 to 40 watts. It generally takes 45 to 60 minutes for the wax to warm up enough to form freely rising blobs when operating the lamp at standard room temperature, and as long as 2 to 3 hours if the room is cooler. When the wax is molten, the lamp should not be agitated or the two fluids may emulsify, and the fluid surrounding the wax blobs will remain cloudy rather than clear. Some recombination will occur as part of the normal cycle of the wax in the container, but the only way to recombine all of the wax is to turn off the lamp and wait for several hours. The wax then settles back to the bottom, forming one blob once again. Severe cases can require many heating-cooling cycles to clear, but by that point, maybe just buy a new lava lamp. Now, in 2015, a new design was introduced that used ferrofluid in place of wax, but by then, I'm not really sure if anybody noticed or cared. Anyway, I will tell you all about how I built a lava lamp along with a considerably more difficult second science challenge next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. It's a joyful thing. Sometimes you just get a break. I caught one thrown out by my ex-wife at the start of my Scienceville and science challenges. Breaks are good things, but they are also unpredictable. You may expect one and not get it, or you may get one while not expecting it. You just may get randomly that so-called bank error in your favor, or take a walk to St. Charles Place and unexpectedly pass go and collect your $200. Now, I know when things get tough, it seems like you can't catch one, and they will be wily and elusive, as that's their nature. But they are there, and often appear when you least expect them, and often when they're most needed. So look for them, as they may be camouflaged, but know that while it isn't always obvious, you may have caught a break somewhere else and not even realized it. Take that moment and reflect, and be thankful for when you do catch that break, and know that you most certainly deserved it. Godspeed, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.